Having relationship problems with a spouse, or anyone for that matter, can be a difficult thing to handle. So to help us better communicate through our issues and have better relationships is Dr. Rob Robinson, Clinical Director of Family Care Counseling Associates in Wilbraham. Thank you for being with us.
Laura, thank you for having me.
And before we talk about better ways to communicate,
yes,
we were talking earlier, and there are two kinds of problems.
Right. There are two types of conflict in relationships. The first type is the simple type, and that's the solvable problems. Those are the easy ones, like where are we going to go to dinner, how are we going to squeeze the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. Those are easy. But 70% of the stuff that comes up in conflict between couples are perpetual issues. That makes up about 70% of the stuff that the couples deal with, and they come up over and over and over again in the course of a relationship. And the thing that can typically tip you off when you're in a perpetual problem is the amount of gridlock that people experience as soon as it starts happening. It rears up emotional reactions between people, and they really come to a grinding halt in the discussion, and people typically get very upset when these things get discussed. So that's why it's important to know some communication tips so that you can get into that kind of discussion without getting gridlock and without having things come to a halt when you're trying to work things out.
And so for the perpetual problems, you have 4 tips.
Yes, actually for any communication piece, but these are really important for the ones that keep coming up over and over again. And the first tip is really to soften negative startups. You've got to begin communication with a softened startup, because if you come out of the gate harshly, it's going to immediately be perceived as a criticism, and the other person's going to get defensive and not want to talk about it, which is typically something that happens with guys a lot because they stonewall and say, I don't want to get into this. So softening negative startups is the first tip. The second suggestion, and this is probably one of the most important of the 4, is to use repair bids. Repair bids or repair attempts are things that keep the relationship in good repair while you're trying to communicate. For example, when you're having an issue with your partner, it's good to remind them that, hey, listen, I love you very much. I'm not trying to criticize you, and I really want to try to work this out because this is important to our relationship. That's a bid, making the repair bid, and the other person in the relationship has to accept it as a bid. They have to see it as a repair attempt so that they know that the person's intention is not about trying to criticize. And repair mechanisms really are probably the most vital thing that couples can learn how to do when they're trying to communicate. Without repair attempts and without repair bids, the relationship is going to be in really tough water in terms of trying to work those things out.
So when you have a problem right off the bat, you want to try to repair it.
You've got to learn how to do those. And by the way, John Gottman has a terrific book called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, where all of these kinds of tips are suggested. He's done years and years of research on this stuff, and he's written very helpful work on trying to help couples learn these tools. The third skill is learning to soothe yourself and soothe your partner, because you don't want to go into what he calls DPA, which is diffuse physiological arousal. What that means simply is you don't want to get flooded. When your heart rate gets up over 90 beats per minute, you're in DPA, you're flooded, and there's no way anyone's going to be able to work anything out.
So flooded is a word for when your heart beat, when you just get really angry and you're like, oh, I love you, but I just can't deal with this right now.
And when Gottman actually did his research, I mean, he would have couples in his lab, and he would hook them up to blood pressure cuffs and take their blood pressure. When he found their heart rate was up over 90 beats per minute, it was impossible for them to be able to communicate and talk. So learning how to soothe yourself, we'll get through this, take it easy, stay calm, let's not get too worked up, I'm not trying to criticize you. And if you are too worked up, then it's great to take a break for at least 30 minutes before you come back, and then try to reconvene using some of the tools. And the last one really has to do with being able to let your partner influence you in discussion. I mean, most oftentimes, if you're not using these tools, it turns into a power struggle, where again the gridlock turns up. It starts activating the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. You don't want to see those in relationships. So you have to kind of a yield to win mentality, allowing your partner to influence how you think and trying to find out how they feel about an issue rather than fighting about it.
All right. Well, Dr. Robinson, thank you for being with us. We appreciate your tips.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
To review these tips, you can head to our website at mymassappeal.com later today.